Well, welcome back, everybody, as we begin the month of December with a series from the Smith and Hellway's Formations literature called The Hope of Christmas. You know, Christie, when we think about the hope of Christmas, you know, it's very easy for us as Christians to understand what that means. You know, on Christmas, God delivered his answer to save us from ourselves, which is in the form of the baby Jesus. And so, you know, we have no problem making that connection again as Christians. However, Christmas isn't always just about hope. Sometimes Christmas can be very difficult for us. It can bring out some challenging things for people. And sometimes people will find their greatest hopelessness, I guess you might say, during Christmas time. Strained relationships, expectations, obligations, and just the busyness of the season. And so I think it's fitting for us as we start this month to talk about the hope of Christmas. And today's lesson is titled God's Deliverance, and we're going to be taking a look at chapter 51 of Isaiah. And I think our lesson writers, the central question is, how can I wait expectantly for God? And I think the lesson writers want us to really explore what the prophet Isaiah has to say that we can pull out and apply to ourselves, because the hope of Christmas, again, is something that we celebrate, but is also something that many of us need a message of hope. So, Christy, what did you pick up on from the prophet this week as you were looking at these verses?
Yeah. Well, just one of the first things that Isaiah was saying to the people were listen. And he says it 3 times. He says it in verse 1, and he says it in verse 4, and then again in verse 3. So 3 times, and I'm assuming that it works like a charm. But he uses that phrase, listen to me. And I think oftentimes we're so caught up with what's going on with the season and the demands or the anticipation of what Christmas brings that oftentimes we don't take time to sort of declutter our lives and spend time with God during that time. And can we really hear what he's trying to say to us? And do we really hear his voice? And I think Isaiah is saying to the Israelites at this point, I know that things are tough, but you've got to remember to listen for God's voice because he's there with you. And when we're experiencing some tough times or brokenness, we have to stop and pause. And God is sort of saying, hey, wait, listen to me. I'm here. Just talk to me, and I'm going to give you a response. It may not be what we want to hear, Joe, but it is God's response. And how often do we get so caught up in trying to solve something or get involved in something, and we just don't take time to listen? I just finished a Bible study with some folks that is too busy to take time to pray. And we all pray, but how many of us take that deliberate time to listen? And I think that is what the prophet Isaiah is saying to the folks. Hold up, wait a minute. Don't look and listen to all these other people. Listen to the God that has been with you since the very beginning. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's a great point that you make. And, you know, when I think about listen, boy, that's just one more thing to put on a very busy list this time of year, right? How do we make time to listen to God during the busiest month of the year? And one of the things that I think our church does a really good job of is every year at this time, we can sign up and get an email of a daily devotional written by one of our members. And I have enjoyed that for the last several years. I think it's a wonderful ministry. And it gives us an opportunity to really listen to God as he speaks through our own prophets, you know, members of the church who, in their own way, feel inspired by God to share a word of encouragement. So I agree with you, and I think I will encourage the people listening today to think about something that you can do and structure and build into your schedule, because it's very easy to listen to a lot of voices this time of year. Make sure we listen to God. So I would agree with you. I would agree with you. How about the second idea behind that?
So the second idea from Isaiah is look, Joe, and we see that in verses 1, 2, and again in 6. And this is really, I think, his way of saying, hey, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget your heritage. You are God's chosen people. You have been a faithful remnant. However, there are things that have shaped you into the people that you are today. Don't forget where you come from. Don't forget who you are, the people who have loved you, the people who have influenced you, even the events that may have shaped you. And he's trying to remind them of that, and that it's important to remember those things and to embrace those, especially those good memories when you're feeling at a time. And you got to remember, these Israelites, boy, they felt hopeless. I mean, they were fractured and in pain. They were broken. They needed to cling to something positive. And he specifically says, at least 3 times, look to, and he makes reference to several things that they should be very grateful for and would be a good resource for hope. And I think you wanted to talk about one of them in particular, Joe, with Abraham.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the idea of look, we typically think about sight, but the things he wants them to look at are not things they can really see physically. And that's why I find it so interesting when he uses Abraham and Sarah, because Abraham and Sarah were people who, they were people who had to live by faith, not sight. I mean, the entire story of Abraham is about him having to trust God at every turn. I think particularly about the story with Isaac. After all those years, God, blessed him. God told him he was going to bless him. Eventually, there was Isaac, and no sooner had they had Isaac than God said, "I want you to give him back to me." And there was Abraham saying, "Well, gee, after all these years, I've got Isaac. I can put my eyes on him, but God's telling me to be obedient, and He'll give me more descendants than I can possibly even count." And he had to live by faith, not by sight. And of course, we know the story. Abraham was willing to sacrifice Isaac. Of course, we know the story ends up he didn't have to. But the whole idea that when we're going through a difficult time, we have to cling to faith, because the people that Isaiah is talking to, the children of God who were in exile after the Babylonian conquest, there was nothing to see that gave them any hope. So Isaiah is saying, hey, look to God, look to your past, look to your faith, and have eyes for faith. And so, yes, I think sometimes that's all we have. But if we live by sight alone, hopelessness is surely going to be a part of it.
And I think the third thing that Isaiah mentions is the word lift, and talking about lifting your eyes to see the future. And really, I think, Jay, that boils down to, can you see things from God's perspective instead of looking at it from your perspective? And, we've all heard, on earth as it is in heaven. Well, the only way to know that is to look up and to look towards eternal things that are going to happen in the future. He's not saying forget the past. He's saying value that, because that's a part of your DNA. That's what sort of knits you together in your relationship with God. I think he's saying, hey, instead of looking horizontal or down, look up and look to me, because I'm here, and I can help provide a future for you if you'll do this. And I think that's real important, that when you get down and out, sometimes just your visual piece of just looking down, or you hang your head, or just your posture is not the same. And here Isaiah is really challenging the people to say, wait a minute, lift up, look up to God, because He can give you the hope that you need. What do you think, Joe?
No, I think it's a great point. The only thing I think about when I read this was that, and you mentioned it, but asking for God's perspective. Too many times we won't pray for God to give it to us the way we want it, or to change something, deliver us from something. But what about if we really prayed that and asked God to give us His vision of it, and just ask for Him to allow us to understand it from His viewpoint? What would that mean in our lives, particularly during dark days or times where we feel hopeless? And it's not the normal thing we do. We don't normally, we'd rather pray for relief. But the hope of Christmas is really about the hope that we will see things from God's perspective, or at least lift up our eyes and understand His sovereignty and the fact that He provides for us. And in that, we can pretty much rest assured that our eternity is guaranteed and that all's going to work out well. So, Christie, do you see kind of any other points in this in terms of wrapping this up this week?
Well, Joe, I think it's just really timely that we obviously started a new unit about hope, and the fact that this Sunday is our first Sunday of Advent, and we're going to be lighting the candle of hope this Sunday. And I think about all the people, specifically like right now in California with all of the wildfires, that things are dark looking and bleak for them. Lots of burned out houses and businesses and schools, and communities just wiped out. And I think about them in particular of just they need some light, and they need some hope. And so I think it's very, very fitting and timely that we're studying this, and this message from Isaiah is coming to the people at a time when they are just down and out as well. And we're obviously no different. And I would hope, no pun intended there, but I would hope that the people that are feeling like maybe this Christmas is going to be hopeless for them, or they might be experiencing some dark time or brokenness, I really do hope that they can see things through God's perspective, and to really listen, look, and lift their eyes to Him this Christmas season. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I just hope everybody will, no pun intended, I hope everybody will reflect on the Scripture this week. Hope everybody will come back next week when we continue in our study this month. Next week we'll be in Jeremiah chapter 33. We'll be talking about how God brings renewal and restoration. So until then, I hope everybody has a great week. God bless you, and we'll see you again next time.